Will we see Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane move on from the Chicago Blackhawks, possibly two of the bigger deadline acquisitions for the upcoming NHL season? We'll discuss their futures, plus we're also going to take a look at the Edmonton Oilers. Would they be a top fit for Patrick Kane and other moves they need to make? Plus we have several signings today and some other news as well. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and some trade talk to take a look at here today as well. First up, we do have some more NHL signings. We still have some big names on the market. Still no news on Nazem Kadri or John Klingberg, Paul Stastny, and a few others, Phil Kessel, PK Subban. But there are some more signings. Some of these are actually extensions as well, including the New Jersey Devils extending young defenseman Jonas Siegenthaler. He's currently making $1.125 million, had one more year left on his deal, and he gets a 5-year contract extension at $3.4 million. Now, he's certainly quietly become one of the, more effective defensive-style defensemen in the league. Certainly well-deserving of this long-term contract extension. It's good value for what he brings. He can play a good amount of minutes, defends well, just does a lot of the little things right, keeps it simple. You don't really hear his name mentioned a whole lot in the run of a game sometimes, which is usually a good thing, which sometimes these defensive defensemen, they don't get a lot of accolades, but he's well-deserving of this contract. I do wonder, though, if this could certainly maybe change the dynamic of that blue line a little bit. And since they've committed to him long-term, they obviously have John Marino, who's under long-term contract they just received in a trade from Pittsburgh. They have obviously Dougie Hamilton's last year's big free agent signing under long-term contract. And of course, there's Damon Severson, who only has 1 year left. These all forward defensemen are all right-handed D. I do wonder, there's been some talk about Severson maybe being a trade target. Of course, there is a potential here for maybe somebody to play their offside. They do have a few other D, of course, to play the left side, but there is some talk and some speculation on what this all could mean for the future of Damon Severson, especially with Marino and Hamilton both being there. That's obviously could cut into power play time. They're both, fully capable of being power play defensemen. So was Severson. So we'll have to see how all that plays out. There's certainly a few teams out there looking for a defenseman, and I do wonder if Damon Severson's name might be something that we hear about here coming up in the next little while before training camp starts. The Edmonton Oilers have come to terms and avoided salary arbitration with young forward Jesse Puljujarvi. Of course, he gets a 1-year deal at $3 million. He'll be an RFA again this time next year. It had been rumored that his camp was looking for around $3.2 million. The Oilers were around $2.8. They've bridged that gap, met halfway, and got a deal done. Of course, Puljujarvi put up 14 goals and 36 points last year. There's still some talk that he even could be a trade piece. We still don't know the full plans and roster of how the Oilers are going to go into the upcoming season. If you take a look at their salary cap situation here, courtesy of capfriendly.com, and I'll give you a quick snapshot here as we talk through this. They certainly look like they don't have any space. CapFriendly currently shows them being over the cap. However, since we're in the offseason, they don't have the long-term injury reserve amounts kicked in here. So basically, if you take a look at it, it shows them being $2.9 million over. But of course, they still have another year on the contract for Oscar Klefbom as well as Mike Smith. Those two contracts total about $6.3 million. So that gives them about $3 million that they can actually go over. So there actually is room. So they do need to still sign Ryan McLeod and Kyler Yamamoto as well. So they're not done signing their restricted free agents. They're already, like I said, technically over, but once the LTIR kicks in, there's a little bit of room there. It's believed that they're going to probably make a cost-cutting move. Some speculate it could be a player like Warren Fogle, who didn't really seize the opportunity to get a bigger role after being acquired from Carolina. Was a bit inconsistent like some of the other bottom six and lower-ranked players on the team. But it could also be a guy like Puljujarvi. Like Puljujarvi might have been a player, especially having arb rights, that teams were not really wanting to trade for, not knowing the outcome of how salary arbitration is going to go. There's a lot of teams we've seen this year certainly were a bit skittish around salary arbitration, and we saw a lot of RFAs not even get qualified because of the thought of what they might get in arbitration. And a tight cap situation continues, and teams are trying to navigate through it, and it's challenging. So now that we know the contract for Puljujarvi, it is possible he could still be moved. It's probably more likely now than it would have been a few weeks ago. But then again, like I said, they very well could go into the season with him on the roster and maybe move somebody else like a Fogle or somebody. But I would imagine at least one player gets moved to create a little bit of wiggle room within the salary cap. They may not really want to be in LTIR too long term, so they can accumulate some space for the deadline, because they are a team we're going to talk about here, possibly here in the future for the deadline, who could be in the running for a guy like Patrick Kane, which we'll talk about here momentarily. A few other signings first, though. The Carolina Hurricanes are bringing back one of their players from 2 seasons ago, Ryan Dzingel. Of course, Dzingel's now a 2-time Ottawa Senator and a 2-time Carolina Hurricane. Of course, he also played for a few other teams last year, including the Toronto Maple Leafs, which he never actually played a game for. Of course, Ryan Dzingel ended up being traded after signing in Arizona last year. He was part of the deal that went to the Leafs when they sent Nick Ritchie to the Coyotes. But of course, he never actually played. They was kept Ilya Lyubushkin. It was Lyubushkin and Dzingel for Ritchie. Lyubushkin stayed. Dzingel got shipped to San Jose, played a handful of games, got put on waivers again, and then finished the year, I believe. He was sent down to the minors after that. Now he's on a 1-year, 2-way contract with Carolina, where he played a couple of years ago, and he had trouble fitting in the lineup then. So I do wonder if that's going to work this time. It's hard to say. Certainly a player who really, he was having a career year in Ottawa a few number of years back, as Ottawa was kind of beginning their big sell-off, as the rebuild was kind of going into full tilt there. He, along with guys like Matt Duchene, all got traded at the deadline after refusing contract extensions, and his career's never really been the same since. Sometimes the grass isn't always greener on the other side. You might get a better offer, but then it doesn't work out, and it doesn't always, can actually have a negative impact on your career sometimes. Speaking of the San Jose Sharks, where Dzingel was last year, one of their top young players is leaving the organization. They still will hold his rights, though, but Sasha Chemlepsky, who's played in the KHL before, is heading back over to the KHL. He's 23 years old, has had a handful of NHL experience, had a pretty good time in the American Hockey League. I kind of get the impression, maybe between he and his agent, that maybe they're a little frustrated that he's not getting regular NHL time. I don't know if that's really what it boils down to or not, but I know GM Mike Greer, who spoke about the situation, didn't necessarily seem to be in agreement that this was the best for his career. It doesn't sound like at all like it was a mutual decision, so a little bit surprising, but we'll see how he makes out and if he makes the return here at some point. And a few other news items. We did get some updates on a big significant injury. The Flyers had announced Bobby Brink was injured. We knew this a little while ago, but now we know the full extent of it. They've completed the successful surgery for a torn labrum in his hip. So Brink is going to be out of action for about 5 months. So he probably won't get on the ice and really be in action probably December at the earliest, most likely January. So that's a big blow to a really, potential real solid young player here trying to take the next steps in his NHL career. Coaching update, the Arizona Coyotes have added John Madden to the staff of Andre Tourigny, so he'll be as an assistant coach. And the LA Kings announced today that longtime NHL captain of the Kings, Dustin Brown, who recently retired at the end of last season, is getting his number retired. It'll be done February the 11th, 2023, the upcoming season here. So no big surprise that Brown's number 23 is going to the rafters. He's a longtime captain. Of course, was involved in multiple Stanley Cup championships. The other thing, though, is they also announced that Brown is also getting a statue outside the arena. It's only going to be the third statue that stands out there with some of the greats. So certainly, I believe it's Gretzky and Robitaille, the other two. So that's quite, the company for Dustin Brown to be in the number 23. I think they're still trying to figure out exactly what the statue will look like, trying to figure out what key moment from his career that's going to be kind of made after. So we'll have to see, but certainly quite an honor of distinction there for Dustin Brown. Now, on to the trade talk of the video here. I want to talk today about Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane. There's two different completely situations and different articles. Let's focus on the Oilers here first. As I said before, the Oilers are looking for a little bit of cap flexibility. They do have the benefit, I guess, in a sense, of a long-term injury reserve of Klefbom and Smith, so they can spend above the cap this year. But, obviously when it comes to accruing cap space for the trade deadline, that might be something that they might want to look into, but not going to be easy to do. But it is rumored, I've seen an article through the Edmonton Journal suggesting that the Oilers could be a team that makes a plea for, that the Oilers could be a team that really goes after a guy like Patrick Kane, maybe for a later season addition. If you think about it, Toews and Kane have huge contracts, yes, but the Chicago Blackhawks at the deadline can definitely eat 50%. There's no harm in doing that. The way their contracts are structured, a lot of the money is already going to be paid out. It's really just for purpose of cap hit. In order to facilitate a trade and make it a little sweeter to offer up some good incentive for a good return, there's no doubt that the Hawks would be willing to do that. So obviously take a look at the Edmonton Oilers, who went to the Final Four last year, are trying to take a big step forward. They feel like they've solidified their goaltending by signing Jack Campbell. Hopefully that works out for them. They brought back Evander Kane, who had a heck of a season in Edmonton after returning. He was a monster in the playoffs. You can say what you want about him off the ice. On the ice, he was an absolute stud for them and really performed at a high level and really clicked with McDavid and Draisaitl a lot of times, of course. So that's another weapon to add to that top six. You've already got Nugent Hopkins, Zach Hyman up there. Typically that's 5 out of your top 6 players, and then a player like either Puljujarvi, Yamamoto, one of those young wingers are usually the final piece there. But can you imagine if that final piece was Patrick Kane? It's fair to say I think Toews and Kane might be looking at things a little bit differently now than when this rebuild kind of first begun, when they first brought in Kyle Davidson as a GM, when they kind of first announced some of their plans. But the Edmonton Oilers are certainly, I think, a team that will be going all out. I think they really saw last year that they can take some big steps, and I don't think that it's unreasonable to think at all that there'll be big spenders at the deadline, especially if you take a look at what's going on in Calgary. It's fair to say that after losing Gaudreau and Tkachuk, yes, they get a great return on that Matthew Tkachuk trade, but you know what? I don't know that the Calgary Flames are going to be as good of a team. Time will tell. Even if Uyghur and Huberdeau have good seasons, it could take some time to adjust. It's hard to say when you see significant change like that just how good they're going to be. But it's possible that, will the Flames be better? I don't know that they're going to be better. I think they're probably going to be maybe a little bit down compared to last year. Hard to say. You get the Vegas Golden Knights. That's going to be interesting to see how they do. Obviously, they had a ton of man games lost last year. The Canucks, we don't know really. The Canucks haven't done a lot. We thought there'd be more surgery to that roster by now, and there hasn't been. They finished strong, so the Oilers are going to have to be on their toes here. They're going to probably be in a tougher division than they might think. And you're looking at, those are probably the top 4 teams that stand the best chance to really get into the playoffs and do some damage. So at the deadline, the Oilers are likely going to be wanting to make some good additions. If they have a chance to get past some of the top teams, assuming teams like Colorado are in the mix again, that's going to be a key piece for them to maybe take that step. So obviously, Kane is somebody who appears to be high up on the radar. I know there's already betting odds about the future of Patrick Kane and where he could play next, which I do think is at this rate, it sounds like Toews and Kane, if they move, would be more likely to be trade deadline acquisitions. The Avalanche and the Oilers are right up near the list of some of the top best odds available. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Can you imagine Patrick Kane on a line with Draisaitl or Connor McDavid? That's absolutely crazy. That would be such a deep top 6 if you add Patty Kane into the mixer that they already have. Now, there's also an Athletic article today from Mark Lazarus doing a in-depth interview with Hawks captain Jonathan Toews, and it certainly sounds like he's changed his tune quite a bit. When the rebuild kind of first begun, it sounded like Kane and Toews were all in to kind of stick around and be a part of the solution, and they couldn't see themselves going anywhere else. And now they really see just how deep this is going to go and how bare bones they want to tear this down to. It certainly sounds to me like things have changed quite a bit, and there's a pretty good chance that Jonathan Toews doesn't want to stick around either. Now, a lot of other things covered in this article, in this interview, which is good, that Jonathan Toews appears to be having a lot of desire to continue playing. It sounds like he's healthy, he's working out, skating, doing lots of things to keep himself in great shape. Obviously, he had a lot of health concerns over the past few years. This past year was better for him, but certainly the year before was tough, and even last year, I'm sure, was interesting for him and tough in the beginning to kind of get back after having such a long layoff. But he seems to be feeling as great as he has in a long time, which is good. The desire and the hunger and the drive appear to be there based on his comments and answers to some of Lazarus' questions. So that part sounds really good. He acknowledged the fact that, that he very well might want to find himself moving on. He talked about the fact of how hard it hit when seeing some of his not only teammates but younger teammates like Alex DeBrincat and Brandon Hagel, and Kirby Dach all get shipped out. He said it was a big eye opener on what the full scope of these plans are. And he also said that Kyle Davidson is saying this is going to be a 5-year rebuild. It's a long process. And he doesn't see himself wanting to really stick around for that. So I'll show you here. I just showed you the snippet from the a quote from the talk about the trades. And here's the quote, which The Athletic actually put this out. It's a paid subscription, so I can't really show you too much of anything without giving it away. But ultimately, here's the piece that they put out on Twitter as like your headline grabber, so to speak, talking about how he doesn't really see himself being a part of the rebuild. But in the article, he also talks about the fact that ultimately that he knows that he's going to play well, to have interest, to be, a player that could be traded at the deadline. And he kind of sounded like the idea of being moved and chasing a cup elsewhere with that desire seemed to be there. So we'll have to wait and see. But based on what we've heard before, what's been coming out now, I do think that's a really high likelihood that Toews and Kane will be moved. They will waive their no-move clauses, I believe, and be moved by the NHL trade deadline for the upcoming season. And I just don't see them returning to Chicago and finishing their careers elsewhere. So, it's something he talked about that he never really thought he'd see before. When you see guys, especially like Malkin, getting a new deal, staying in Pittsburgh, and the Penguins remaining competitive through the entire career, it's kind of like a situation where, he probably kind of like he feels like it's not fair almost, but at the same time, it's just how things have been managed on each team. It's very different scenario, and circumstances dictate that from a business perspective, this is what's best for them right now. So to see those players wear different uniforms after this year is certainly quite a real possibility, and something that I do believe is going to happen. So it'll be interesting to see where these players end up. Let me know for Jonathan Toews, where do you think as a deadline acquisition would make the most sense? A lot of teams always looking for that middle six centerman who can shut down and play good defense and pitch in a little bit on the offense. It's usually quite a common type of player that we see up for grabs. He certainly fits the mold there, especially if he's playing at the top of his game. So let me know your thoughts on Kane and Toews' future in Chicago. Where do you see them heading, and do you see them likely moving on, since this rebuild is clearly much deeper and prolonged than they likely ever imagined when it first begun? Let me know your thoughts. We'll talk about it further in the comments. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.